The moment the room fell silent, I knew something was amiss. With her little hands still shaking over the keys, my daughter had just finished playing the piano. When I realized what was missing, no cheers, no courteous nods, just silence. The last note had just begun to fade. Then I heard it, just loud enough to break the silence. In a whisper, a woman behind me said, "That's the poor girl, the one with the single mom." My chest constricted. My ears are ringing. I was unable to even look back. I simply sat still, clutching the seat's edge, as if it would prevent me from collapsing. Elelliana is the name of my daughter. She is 10 years old, and she gave her all at her school's annual talent performance last night. She composed her own song, spent weeks practicing it, and gave it her all. I observed her staying up late after finishing her homework, playing tunes on a small keyboard we purchased at a secondhand store while wearing headphones. She thought that song was true. However, they didn't applaud when she performed it on stage in front of her peers, the judges, and a large group of parents. No sporadic claps of sympathy, not even, nothing. I sat in the middle row and stared at her. She bowed as I had instructed, then looked up, hoping for a response. I briefly believed I saw her swallow the disappointment, the bewilderment, and the guilt when our eyes locked. I really tried not to cry. Something happened right when I thought I would have to get up, take her hand, and lead her out of that auditorium like we were fleeing a fire. A man got to his feet. The very back row was where he was seated. By themselves, tall and older, wearing a subdued gray suit. He was not smiling. He remained silent. He simply began to make his way toward the stage along the aisle. I recall how the room changed. The rising sound of whispers. Uncertain of what was happening, the judges exchanged glances. He moved in a way that stopped me from thinking about running. So I recall holding my breath. I had a feeling that this was not the conclusion of the tale. It was just the start. Claire Harper is my name. Since my daughter Elelliana was 2 years old, I have been raising her alone. I am currently 34 years old. We live in a little sleepy town in Hollow Ridge, Indiana, where people not only wave, but also take note of your car's make and model and whether your child's bag is brand new or used. People ask someone else why you're still unmarried after they smile at you in the grocery store. I've spent my entire life here, and I usually fit in. However, events like the school talent show serve as a reminder that I don't truly fit in. Not in their manner. I have 2 jobs. I work as a janitor at the nearby middle school during the day. I work in a 24-hour diner off the highway at night, where I serve teens and truckers who are hungry at 2 in the morning. It's honest, but it's not glamorous. It covers the expenses. Above all, it enables me to care for Elelliana. To me, Elelliana is everything. She is heartfelt and soft-spoken. She doesn't follow trends or run with the popular youngsters. She enjoys listening to music, not only mainstream songs or radio tunes. Strange, soulful tunes that emanate from deep within her are her favorite. At the age of 7, she began penning little songs. This one feels like rain. Or, this one is what it sounds like when someone misses you. Simply humming things into a recorder. Last spring, I spent $60 on a used piano for her at a garage sale. When she turned it on, it lit up, and although it had a sticky B-flat key and no stand, it seemed magical to her. Every day after school, she played it, her fingers lingering as though she were unearthing a holy object. Sometimes, with her eyes closed, she would play for hours on end, searching for a sound that she could only perceive. Elelliana asked to participate in the school's annual talent show when it was announced. I paused for a moment. She is not a child who is looking for attention. According to her, however, I want them to hear what I wrote. That's the name she gave it. Not her performance. It's not her song. Just what I wrote. When she submitted the sign-up form, she was ecstatic. She practiced her piece every day for weeks. I would listen to her in the other room as I prepared dinner. Sometimes I would merely stop stirring the pot to listen, I promise. What she had produced had an eerie and lovely quality. She played more than simply notes. She related a tale, However, I could also see the anxieties beneath the pride. Although she didn't talk much about school, I was aware of it. She is the only student in her class who does not use a character lunchbox. Instead, she packs her lunch in a grocery store bag. Despite being tidy, her shoes are constantly a season behind. I was aware that the music wouldn't be the only reason I stepped onto that stage. It would have to do with visibility. She practiced nonetheless. I'm not trying too hard, but it's wonderful that she wanted me to braid her hair. The previous evening, she laid out her attire. The dress from last Easter, her nicest one. I hand-stitched the ripped hem. She grinned at herself as she gazed in the mirror. We got there early, on the night of the performance. The auditorium was full. Children in glittering leotards and glittery costumes raced about backstage. In groups, parents discussed and contrasted weekend camps and private sessions. In an attempt to blend in, I sat by myself in the center of the crowd, holding my hands tightly. As Elelliana's name was called, I shifted slightly in my chair and squinted to catch a glimpse of her. She approached the piano gently, her fingers twitching but her chin up. I said to myself in a whisper, "You're capable, sweetie." She took a seat on the bench, set up the microphone as she had practiced, and pressed the keys. After that, she began to play. The atmosphere started to transform as soon as Elelliana began to play, but not in the way I had intended. As if bringing the listeners into a moment that only she could recall, she played the first chords of her composition, slowly and softly. Like a whisper, the tune drifted through the audience, a lullaby tinged with both hope and grief. Nothing that the children before her had done sounded like that. No karaoke, no ostentatious gestures, no supporting music. It was just her, a piano, and a tale she was telling herself. Watching her close her eyes as the notes transported her away made my heart race with pride as I sat on the edge of my seat. I sensed something else, though, as I looked around the audience. They weren't paying attention. There were two parents whispering at the back. Two children in the front row burst out laughing. One judge, the one with the clipboard and big blazer, looked down at his phone and began typing. The woman beside me took out a pack of gum as if she were anticipating an elevator. Then I heard it. It should be obvious that she is the poor girl with the single mother. I didn't hear the words. They gave me a chill. I turned a little to see who had said it, but I didn't have to. I was aware of the type already. Someone who had never had to tell their child why Santa made them just one present. Someone who never had to decide between paying for the field trip and fixing the automobile. With enough force to taste metal, I bit the inside of my cheek. I wanted to get to my feet, to protect her. "She is more than whatever story you've made up about us," she yelled. However, I was unable to move my legs. My pulse was thumping in my throat, and my body was motionless. Elelliana continued to play. Her hands were always steady. She gave every note her all, as if it were important, and someone would relate. However, they didn't. Not that evening. She concluded with a delicate, unresolved chord that floated in the air, sweet and surprising. Then there was silence. She held it for a moment and bowed, as we had practiced. Slowly, she raised her head and looked around the room. No applause. Not even a handful out of civility. There was a cough. There was a creak in a chair. After clearing his throat, the middle judge turned to the next page in his folder. That was it. For too long, Elelliana stood there. Only long enough for me to see a change in her features. Her once tiny, hopeful smile turned into a narrow, perplexed line. As she left the platform, her gaze fell to the ground. From the other side of the room, I could sense her struggling to keep her composure. My heart broke. I wanted to jump out of my chair, take her in my arms, and drag her out of here, away from these people who were blind to what I was seeing. They were mistaken, and I wanted to tell her so. That her music was important. That she was important. However, I was immobile. I just sat there, fighting back tears and feeling numb. Because I was worried I wouldn't stop crying if I did. I glanced around once more, at the judges already getting ready for the next act. at the moms with their beauty and pricey handbags, and at the dads filming on their smartphones and hardly paying attention. Nobody gave a damn. That's when I sensed it. A change. Delicate. A man got up from the very back row. He didn't resemble the others. He wore a plain suit. He had no phone in his hand. He wasn't reacting or clapping like the others. He was only watching the stage, still as a rock. Then, he began to move in the direction of the front. People whirled. A voice said, "Who is that?" The judges exchanged perplexed glances. There was intended to be a group dance performance as the next act. There was no speaker scheduled. I put a hand across my chest, out of habit, and sat up straighter. Something told me that this man was here for her, even though I had no idea who he was or what he was doing. Nobody stopped him at first. With his hands behind his back, the man in the gray suit continued to move slowly down the aisle, steady as if he were accustomed to being watched. He didn't appear hurried. He made no hesitation, but the room became quieter with each stride. Even the whispering parents stopped talking. The judges appeared perplexed one by one. As if to stop him, one of them partially got up from her seat. Then she sat down again, uncertain. Wide-eyed, the children backstage peered around the curtain. I continued to watch Elelliana. She was holding her music folder to her chest as she stood at the side of the stage, somewhat hidden by the shadows. Although she wasn't sobbing, she wasn't feeling well either. She appeared to be attempting to fold herself into a smaller shape, as evidenced by her tight jaw and inwardly curled shoulders. When he arrived at the front of the room, the man looked up at the judges. "Pardon me," he remarked in a composed yet authoritative tone. "Would it be okay if I used the microphone for a little while?" He didn't say anything else. Nothing grandiose, just a polite, straightforward request. The space was still. After glancing at the other judges, a young man wearing a maroon jacket offered a barely noticeable nod. Without a word, a student volunteer gave the man the microphone. He approached the center stage cautiously, looked up at the audience, and raised the microphone. "My name is Dr. Nathaniel Blake," he introduced himself, "and I wasn't supposed to be here tonight. I came to watch my granddaughter perform because my trip home was canceled." Then I heard a sound, something that made me halt. He hesitated. The space slanted in. "I've been a Juilliard piano instructor my entire life. I've taught symphonic soloists, film composers, and concert pianists. And not many songs have ever captivated me as much as that young girl's music did just now in all those years." The quiet changed. It was reverent, no longer clumsy or hollow. His eyes were gentle as he looked to the side of the stage. "Elelliana," he replied, "may I ask, did you write that piece yourself?" Unsure of whether to run or smile, she nodded slowly. He faced the crowd once more. "That was a unique composition, ladies and gentlemen. It was a voice. It was art." A couple of gasps. Juilliard, as if it were a term she had only ever seen in movies, was actually whispered by a parent close to me. Dr. Blake went on, "I have a favor to ask. Would you mind playing your piece again, Elelliana, if you don't mind? Might I come with you this time?" My breath caught. With a quick flip of her eyes, Elelliana turned to face me. I nodded to her in the slightest way possible without crying. She returned to the stage softly, her footsteps hardly audible. She was allowed to sit first by Dr. Blake, who moved aside. Then he took a seat next to her, sharing the bench rather than occupying it. He waited for her to lead, while his hands lingered over the keys. Then she started to play. The notes didn't sound tiny this time. It seemed as though her song had found a voice that had been yearning to reverberate beneath the subdued chords of Dr. Blake. She wasn't overpowered by him. He trailed behind her, helped her. Like a second pair of wings, she raised her music. The change in the room was palpable. The giggling ceased. The parents leaned in. The judges set their pencils down. Nobody turned their heads. There was a beat of perfect silence when they hit the last note. Then everyone in the auditorium stood up. The cheers came in waves. Raw hand clapping, whistles, and shouts. Those who had previously ignored her were suddenly standing and applauding as if she had received a national honor. There were phones out, recording. One judge wiped her eyes, and I saw it. I stood up as well, giving a painful clap. And Elelliana, it was the tiniest, most genuine smile I've ever seen as she turned to face Dr. Blake. She was no longer the poor girl in that instant. She played music, they saw her, and I realized that everything had suddenly altered. Elelliana remained seated at the piano, with her hands resting lightly on her lap, as the applause eventually subsided. Her wide eyes were filled with something more, akin to amazement, than fear. She surveyed the auditorium as though it were her first time. Dr. Blake leaned in her direction and spoke in a voice we couldn't hear. After giving a single nod, she rose slowly and bowed once more. However, the gesture was not timid this time. It exuded pride, deliberate. She raised her head, chin up. Additionally, the room gave her everything that it hadn't given her before. People turned to one another as they left the stage together, curious about her identity. Parents were now straining to see her more closely after ignoring us in the school pickup line. Children muttered in wonder. With a clipboard in hand, one of the judges even followed her backstage, grinning as if they had just found a secret gem. My pulse was racing, my eyes were full, and I was still clapping as I stood in the crowd. At the time, I didn't give a damn about what people thought of me. My daughter was the only thing I saw, for who she was, not for what we lacked. She rushed into my arms as soon as she exited the stage. She muttered, "I did it," into my chest. I was unable to talk. I simply squeezed her closer. A moment later, Dr. Blake arrived, grinning. He extended his hand toward me. However, he said before I could shake it, "I don't see your daughter very frequently, but she has an amazing skill." That was the truth. It was more than talent. I've finally found my voice. I'm grateful that you saw her and gave her the opportunity. He gave a nod. She made it. It wasn't mine to give. I just made sure nobody missed it. He then gave me a card after reaching into his coat pocket. His name and an address in New York were imprinted on it. "I'd like to put her in touch with someone at a youth arts foundation I work with, if you're game," he continued. "For talented young composers, they provide personalized mentoring and weekend intensives. I have heard what I needed to hear. Therefore, she won't need to try out." I was taken aback. I glanced at him and then down at the card. "She's never taken a formal lesson," I said. "I mean, we can't really afford much right now." He grinned. "That won't be an issue. It has to do with access. She is deserving of more than just attention." Elelliana gazed up at me uncertainly, as if her eyes alone were requesting permission. I tried not to cry as I nodded. "Say thank you, baby." She said thank you in a quiet but firm voice. Dr. Blake turned, tilted his head, and strode back toward the assembly. When we arrived home that evening, Elelliana refused to take off her dress. Humming something fresh, she sat on the floor of the living room with a keyboard on her lap. Since I lacked the energy to cook, I got us bowls of cereal, and we ate like a picnic under the ceiling fan, cross-legged on a blanket. She looked up at me while playing a few bars of her new tune. She questioned, "Do you think I can really go to the place the music man said?" I remarked, putting a curl behind her ear as I reached over. "You already did." 5 months have passed since my daughter's transformational night. Just by being herself, without alteration, we still reside in the same modest home. I continue to work at both jobs. When I can, I still take leftovers from the diner home. Elelliana still occasionally dons used shoes. But now it feels different. Not because we own more possessions or more money, but since my daughter has a new perspective on herself for the first time. She has been going to weekend mentorship sessions at a music conservatory an hour outside of town ever since that evening. We get up before the sun comes up every Saturday. We drive together after I pack a thermos of hot cocoa, me and her alone. In the car, music is playing softly. She watched the cornfields pass by with her face pushed against the window. She is no longer the same girl who was afraid no one would pay attention when she took the stage. She then discusses layering, dynamics, and the feeling that a minor chord evokes. Her professors claim that she is writing with a depth that they often don't see in pupils twice her age. Sometimes she still performs the first piece, the one for which no one applauded. She plays it differently now, though, more assured, more positive, fuller but not louder, as if every note belonged to her. She also does. I also experienced a change. I thought we had to keep our heads down for years. Keep quiet, remain thankful, not demand more than what was provided. I reasoned that it would be sufficient to shield her from criticism, failure, and othering. However, I was mistaken. She didn't require protection. Permission was granted to be heard. Talk a space. She must have faith in her own voice, even if the room remained quiet. I nearly let the moment pass us by. Thinking the quiet meant she wasn't enough, I nearly let her leave the stage. However, one stranger, one individual who decided to listen, ensured that didn't occur. And I can't stop thinking about that. There was no miracle. It was hardly a stroke of luck. It was a choice. Her music wasn't the only thing Dr. Blake heard. He knew. Then he took action. With strength. Not to save her, but to make her more noticeable. That's all it takes sometimes. One person who is prepared to pay close attention when everyone else remains seated to move ahead. For a child to remember, you are not invisible. And sometimes knowing that someone else sees your light is all you need to keep going. Even for a brief instant, our lives weren't drastically altered by that night. However, it gave my daughter something that I could never have written into a bedtime story or wrapped in a package. It made her feel as though she was deserving of attention. It also gave me something. It served as a reminder that the quiet of others does not mean the end of our story, that you don't have to stop playing if nobody applauds. You continue because you never know who might hear you, and everything might change because of that individual. Consequently, each time I see Elelliana touch the keys, I'm not concerned about who is observing. I am aware that she no longer plays to impress. She is acting in order to be honest. And more music like that is needed in the world. And in that quiet moment, when Elelliana was finally seen for who she truly is, I realized something. The best revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's living fully, growing stronger, and choosing peace when pain begs for war. If you're carrying betrayal in your heart, let it push you toward healing, not hate. Set your boundaries. Choose yourself. And know that success, silence, and self-love often speak louder than any payback ever could. Have you ever found strength through betrayal? Share your story in the comments. We heal better when we heal together.